morning, everybody. My name is Sofia MANOUTZOPOULOU. I'm doctoral candidate at the University of Western Macedonia. Today, I'm going to present you a part of the theoretical framework of my doctoral dissertation titled Leadership and Ethics, a Systemic Approach of the Leadership Phenomenon in the Management of Changes. This study examines the questions of leadership and the leader in the light of its ethical dimension in the field of management of changes, which take place in the organizations as a necessary condition for their adaptation to the modern global socioeconomic developments. The ethical political philosophy of Aristotle, as depicted in the two works of the ancient Greek philosopher, the Rhetoric and the Nicomachean Ethics, is oriented towards connecting leadership as a political guiding art and power, which aims at eudaimonia, happiness, with rhetoric as an art of persuasion. Thus, it constitutes the theoretical background which leads research to the systemic approach of the leadership phenomenon and the analysis of characteristics which compose the personality of the leader. Leadership, as an expression of power and influence, focuses on the personality of the leader, who, as an Aristotelian orator, is asked to modulate and regulate rules of civic virtue using his political thought and action in a constantly evolving and developing environment, an environment that is constantly changing. On the basis of the power of socioeconomic developments and the power of knowledge and learning to change the culture, seen as the basic condition of management and ethical control of changes, the objective of this study is to spot the influences of the ethical political philosophy of Aristotle and of the personality of the orator in the thought, action, personality and power of the modern leader and highlight their timeless contribution. Following this direction, the first part introduces the theoretical ethical philosophical approach of the matter, in accordance with which the dominant position of the political leader in the society and the political action as a power of influence towards the ultimate good, the eudaimonia, happiness of all mankind, is embodied in the Aristotelian orator. Based on the power and the influence of the leader, the second part attempts a systemic approach of the leadership phenomenon with a view to highlight the traits that contribute to achieving its results in a dynamic and constantly changing environment, and to examine their interconnection with the corresponding results of the ethical Aristotelian reflection. In the third part, the dynamic of the socioeconomic reformations in the understanding of the logic of changes directs the study to the systemic methodological approach of their management, particularly to the systemic thought and perception of the leader for their accomplishment, this way leading to the conclusions of the study. Leadership and ethics, the ethical leadership of Aristotle. The ethical political philosophy of Aristotle, as depicted in the Nicomachean Ethics and the Rhetoric, addresses ethics as a science and treatment to the behavior and actions of people. And in this regard, the invention of the deliberative orator is to persuade or dissuade, and he shall know about which good or evil, so as to give his advice. According to the spirit of the Aristotelian ethics, leadership is a power of guiding to the right conduct through the power of influence it has, thereby making these two traits attributes of the leader. Leadership, according to Aristotle, has a dominant position in society and the political action, since as a power of influence aims at the ultimate good, the eudaimonia, happiness of all people. This ultimate good is the subject of the political art science, which occupies in the first position in the hierarchy of arts sciences, and according to Aristotle sets the rules of what we shall and what we shall not do, the end that should be the good for the man. And as long as what this art science mostly ensures is giving citizens a certain quality, make them good and capable of making good actions, this direction plausibly connects leadership as a political guiding art with rhetoric as an art of influence. According to Aristotle, the practice of the ethical political leadership focuses on the character of the leader politician, who, according to SERDARIS, shall be thinking and acting as a wise legislator, thus creating virtuous political circumstances, defending with prudence and fairness basic Aristotelian virtues, the legal goods of the citizen and the people. His knowledge and regular training on the city issues, knowledge on every issue, experience, information, in order to be able to negotiate a common agreement in the framework of a code of moral values, a balance between the personal good and the common good, the eudaimonia, happiness of all people, as the moral end result. His virtuous behavior and the quality of his character and his ethos, the turning unifying point between the logical and psychological persuasion. His knowledge on the human psyche in relation to the passions, the addictions, the ages and the fates, in order to be able to bring people to a certain state using prudence and good spirits by projecting himself as a person who has certain qualities which are of great importance for persuasion. His experience in order to be able to influence the choices and actions of people through his attitude and his personality. The knowledge of rhetorics, the ability of the logical and psychological persuasion, which is achieved, according to Aristotle, sometimes by the character of the orator, other times by the specific mood he created at the soul of the listener, and other times by the proving or seemingly proving arguments that his speech consists of. And the art of rhetoric, which according to Aristotle is a combination of the analytical science and the political science that relates to the ethical issues. In the ethical work of Aristotle, the Nicomachean Ethics, the ethical teaching of the ancient Greek philosopher reaches its main point, the definition of eudaimonia, happiness, as the perfect virtue. Eudaimonia is a principle. It is for its sake that we all do what we do. Eudaimonia is the activity of the soul in accordance with the perfect virtue. Thus, eudaimonia, happiness, is an activity and not a state, an activity of the human soul in accordance with the rules of the perfect virtue, the end and the perfection in every aspect, and politics as a practical science, based on the personality of the political orator and his power of influence towards the reassurance of unity and harmony. The Aristotelian orator. The rhetoric, according to Triandari, is a future-proof structured handbook which refers to the multifaceted spiritual and ethical education and culture of the orator, so that he can lead his people as an ethical and spiritual leader and acts as a compass of personal and social change. The rhetoric analyzes in a theoretical and practical level the art of rhetoric, the use of the language and the techniques of the verbal style, the formation of arguments to achieve the logical persuasion, and more generally, the persuasive ethical rhetoric speech, which rises from the character and the personality of the orator, the mood he chooses to provoke, and the knowledge of forming logical arguments. The Aristotelian orator has the four ancient Greek virtues: wisdom, prudence, justice, and courage, and the abilities of self-awareness, self-control of his feelings and his thoughts, as well as self-management and regulation of his desires, choices, and actions. By knowing the human passions, rage, mildness, friendship, love and hate, shame and shamelessness, grace, kindness, nice behavior, mercy, frustration, envy, and jealousy, as well as the ethics, namely the characters of the people, in comparison with the passions, the habits, virtues and vices, aids and fates, the orator has the ability to penetrate into the psychology of people, handle their feelings, and through his passion and ethical, persuasive, and qualitative speech motivate and inspire them. He inspires the credibility and trust of people through his ethical virtues as a result of ethos, of his intellectual virtues, which owe their genesis and their increase mostly to teaching, and that is why what is needed for it is experience and time, and his virtues of styles. His intellectual virtues relate to the ethos and pathos of the orator, which in combination with the virtues of style, hypocrisy, the tension, the harmony, and the rhythm of the voice, enhance his persuasiveness by provoking the mood, passions, and emotions of people. He is driven by empathy, one of the most basic ethical virtues, with psychological dimensions in the interpersonal relations and the basic characteristics of the modern leader, since, according to Triandari, this is the background of persuasion, an extremely important tool of promoting communication relationships, where the power of speech meets the power of ethos and soul, of passions. In his work, Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle tried to define emotional intelligence by examining the definition of the golden mean as an excellent ethical virtue, concerning the moderation of the expression of passions and actions in the context of interpersonal communication. One may feel scared or show courage, may feel desire or rage or compassion, may generally feel content or discontent in a greater or a lesser extent, and none of this is good. But if all of these are felt at the right time, regarding the things that they should be felt for, regarding the people that they should be felt for the reason that they should be felt for, and in the way that they should be felt, then that is in a sense the mean and the best. framework of the conduct of the orator and his communication skills is set in the Aristotelian model of emotional intelligence. By exercising and developing his ethical virtues, prudence, fairness, honesty, wisdom, respect, goodwill, and his intellectual virtues, ethos and pathos, the power of these virtues is showcased in the management of the soul and the emotions and the control of the adjustment of the audience. Systemic approach of leadership, power and influence. Having as a theoretical background the philosophical current of the ethical leadership of Aristotle, the modern definitions for leadership and the leader focus on the power and influence relation for the handling of changes in the modern, complex, and constantly changing environment. Thus, according to Bourada's, leadership means change, and it could be defined as the process of influencing the thought, emotions, attitude, and conduct of a large or small, typical or atypical group of people, or even the people by one person, leader, in such a way that they voluntarily, willingly, and with the right cooperation do their best to meet their goals that stem from the group's mission and their ambition to achieve progress or a better future. It constitutes the most representative definition in which two of the most fundamental traits of leadership and the leader are found. Firstly, the ability of the leader to exert influence on other people. Secondly, according to Aristotle, the voluntary will of people strive for the accomplishment of goals that have to do with ambitions or ideals for progress or a better future. Leadership, according to Bouradas, is a process that is exercised through power and influence. The meaning of power is referred, according to Max Weber, as the ability of a man to impose his wishes to other people by influencing their behavior through a social relationship despite their opposition. The meaning of influence refers to the change of thought, ideas, emotions, attitudes, abilities, and expectations, and mostly to the conduct of a person or a group or the people through the impact of the power of another person, leader. Thus the power, legitimate power, authority of the knowledge and abilities of the specialists of information and the influence of the attitudes, emotions, and conduct of people are the means used by the leader to direct, guide, and encourage to exercise leadership. The systemic approach of leadership. Leadership means influence, and based on its systemic approach, the promotion of its fundamental aspects pursued both in the dynamic relationship of interaction between them and the constantly changing, dynamic, and complex environment of change in which it takes place. Under the systemic logic, leadership is studied and analyzed as an open system which consists of its inflows, the process, and its outflows. According to Bouradas, the inflows of leadership have to do with aspects, characteristics that the leader should have, namely the power, abilities, values, and personality traits, his character. The process of leadership includes the leader's conduct, his actions, and roles, as well as the way he exercises his leadership style. The outflows of leadership refers to its results, the change of attitudes, conducts, culture, and developments. The environment includes the context in which the leadership is exercised, culture, nature of the work, climate, structures, opportunities, complexity, changes, etc. Based on the aforementioned systemic logic, the effective leadership is characterized by the achievement of the results of the leader, which is defined, according to Ulrich and Jenger, as the product of the leadership behavior, conduct character of the leader on the results of the leader, efficient leadership behavior on the results, and not as their sum. Thus, if one of the coefficients is zero, then the product is also zero, namely the leader does not actually lead. Therefore, the achievement of the results of the leader merely depends on his leadership behavior, which is further defined by the quality of his character, the ethics of his speeches and his actions, his values and attitudes, his abilities and virtues, his personality as a whole, in order for the Aristotelian orator to influence, persuade, inspire, motivate, encourage, guide, lead, challenge the status quo, to bring change. Management of changes and leadership. The systemic approach of the management of changes. There is nothing harder than study and design, nothing more ambiguous than success, and nothing more dangerous than management, administration of new institutions, states Machiavelli in his work The Prince, attributing resistance to change to all those who profit from the old institutions, and that ability to change partly to the fear and partly to the disbelief of people who do not truly believe in innovations before gaining experience. Change means transition from a given situation to a new one, and its achievement requires a scientific approach, supervision and interpretation of things, the knowledge and the political will as a process of negotiation to the understanding of complexity and conflicts. The scientific way of thinking has to do with a systematic perception of the dynamics and evolutions of human systems, which, just as biological systems based on the wisdom of nature, consist of the external and internal environment. Thus, according to the reflective logic, the business reality is evolving in a global state of complexity, conflicts, uncertainty, and instability, elements that attribute to it a sense of flux. Everything flows, according to Heraclitus. The same reflective logic sees modern organization as a dynamic system which goes under constant changes of its internal and external environment. And as in the natural world, a constant development takes place, a constant qualitative transformation, the genesis and the decline, according to Aristotle. All these are accompanied by endless potentials and choices, making the future development of the system unpredictable. However, the system must adapt based on the dynamic image of the natural world, attributing a sense of adaptability to it. Modern organizations, as open dynamic systems, go under these constant changes of the internal and the external environment, and their changes, especially in innovation, in education, in their social intellectual capital, constitute a necessary condition of adjustment to the constantly changing socioeconomic changes, showcasing the dynamic relationship of the society and governance, the dynamic relationship of interaction between the power of politics and the socioeconomic changes with the power of knowledge and learning. From the content of the scientific field of the management of changes, which consists of the scientific supervision, knowledge, concepts, theories, models and techniques, the importance of understanding the complexity and the conflicts, of understanding the logic of change, culture, is showcased as the basic condition and process of negotiation in order to comprehend the introduction and institutionalization of general strategic changes, structures, systems, processes. So, in the phrase coined by Trager, culture is strategy for breakfast. The organization of perceptions and mentalities, the moral relocation, the development of organizational education culture are showcased as the basic conditions for the institutionalization and accomplishment of broader changes. Thus, the work of management of changes, according to Baines, primarily has to do with a complex educational and strategic change of knowledge, beliefs, attitudes, values, mentalities, and conduct of every person at first with a view to adjust to the new technologies, the new facts, and the new challenges. It has to do with a political will for change, the leadership of changes. Leadership and management of changes. According to Morgan, achieving changes requires the ability of multi-level analysis, systemic thought, and interpretation of the several angles that constitute modern organization. Approaching organization from eight different, in a figurative way, angles as a machine, as a biological organism, as a brain, as culture, as a political system, as a mental prism, as flow and transformation, and as an instrument to dominate which correspond to a specific doing of things, limited angle, to an expansion of the limits of thought like the natural evolution, to education, to the step-by-step evolution of the human science, to the attitudes and perceptions, to the political dimension and analysis, to the lock into a specific view, to the most important and most powerful angle of flux of things, to the state of natural and social dominance, respectively, the understanding of organizational phenomena, for instance, for the failure to change, requires, according to Morgan, the ability to recognize the above-mentioned angles and their complex interpretation. Thus, changes are based on observation, on analytical thought and interpretation of things, on repetition and drawing of conclusions, on evolution. Having approached the concepts and the content of leadership and changes systemically, the conclusions of this study can be summarized as follows. Leadership is a process of influencing the thought, the emotions, the attitudes and conducts of a small or large, typical or atypical group of people or the people in such a way that they voluntarily, willingly, and in cooperation with each other do their best for a better future. Leadership is exercised through the power and the influence of the leader. The effective leadership focuses on the personality of the leader, the power, the abilities, the values, and the character of the leader, aspects that further define his leadership behavior, a basic variant regarding to the achievement of his results. The accomplishment of change requires political will, scientific approach and interpretation of things and knowledge. The changes in organizations constitute a basic condition for their adjustment to the modern socioeconomic transformations and their conservation on the basis of the natural flux and evolution of things. The management of changes requires the change of culture, the organization of perceptions and modalities, the moral allocation, the development of organizational education culture of every individual in order for them to adapt to the new circumstances. The modern leader, in the context of complexity, of the dynamic of the socioeconomic reformations and the ethical management of development, should have the ability of multi-level systemic analysis, thought, and perception of things, should be characterized by an independence of mind on the basis of system of values, by intellectual and moral maturity, thus reminding of the qualities of the Aristotelian orator, the Aristotelian ethical political thought, analysis, and action. Conclusion. There is nothing better than a good theory, and that is because a good theory successfully turns action to knowledge for wisdom, states Lewin in this study. And in this study, the Aristotelian ethics, the ethical political philosophy of leadership and the leader, as shown in the two works of the ancient Greek philosopher, the Rhetoric and the Nicomachean Ethics, makes its influences obvious to the modern approaches of the leadership phenomenon and the way leadership is exercised in a dynamic changing environment. In the context of the modern socioeconomic developments and the complexity of things, of the conflicts and disputes, the power of politics and its dynamic connection with the power of knowledge and learning is showcased as a necessary condition of adjustment to the new circumstances, as a need for action and change of state. Thus, according to the Aristotelian ethics, leadership as a guiding power of influence towards the right conduct and having as an ultimate goal to pursue the personal and social happiness, focuses on the personality of the political leader who, as an Aristotelian orator, is asked to inspire, motivate, and guide the actions for change, learning, and new knowledge based on a negotiating and meditating spirit. On the basis of the comparative analysis of the Aristotelian current and the systemic approach of leadership and the changes based on their dynamic connection, the contribution of the Aristotelian ethics is showcased in the modern reflective logic for the thought and action of the modern leader, summarizing the most basic influences of ethical and political philosophy, of leadership, and of the political orator on the personality of the political leader are the following. Leadership is a guiding political art process of influencing the thought, the attitudes, the emotions, and the conducts of a group of people or the people by an individual, the leader, in order for them to voluntarily do their best for a better future, for the achievement of eudaimonia, happiness. Leadership is exercised through the power and the influence of the leader. Leadership focuses on the personality of the leader, on his character and his behavior, his values and attitudes, his knowledge and his abilities, his intellectual and ethical maturity as a whole. Leadership is based on rhetoric, on the knowledge of forming logical arguments, and the intellectual, according to Aristotle, virtue of the emotional intelligence for the accomplishment of logic and psychological persuasion. Leadership is an art of rhetoric, of a combination of the analytical science and the political science that relates to the moral issues. More specifically, in the context of the modern socioeconomic developments and reformations, the complexity of things, the conflicts and disputes, the modern leader should have the ability of multi-level systemic analysis, thought, and perception of things, should be characterized by an independence of mind on the basis of a system of values and by intellectual and moral maturity, thus reminding of the qualities of the Aristotelian orator and the Aristotelian ethical political thought, analysis, and action, in order for him to be able to inspire by adopting a code of ethical values and independence of spirit, to gain the credibility and trust of people through his ethics, culture, and maturity, to understand the complexity of things through his systemic and analytical thought, to captivate the heart through his empathy and knowledge of the human psyche, to captivate the mind through his ability to form logical arguments, to act in a negotiating and mediating way through his right conduct and the moral quality of his personality, to know what the common welfare is, what is useful and beneficial, and which his final objective is. Thank you for your attention.